Okay, so it's live. Welcome to our channel, comrade Alan Gibson from Bolshevik Tendency. It's not international Bolshevik Tendency, but Bolshevik Tendency. So maybe firstly, could you say why it is not international Bolshevik Tendency and what is your organization?
So the Bolshevik Tendency is a split from the International Bolshevik Tendency in 2018. The International Bolshevik Tendency actually split three ways. There was also a small um, Southeast Asian group who are now called the Bolshevik Group or Group Bolshevik. I can't remember. But the main question of the main split was over the nature of Russia. Was Russia an imperialist state or a non-imperialist state? The International Bolshevik Tendency considers Russia to be imperialist. Therefore, they have no side in the current war in Ukraine because they believe it to be a proxy war between two imperialist sides. Us in the Bolshevik Tendency do not consider Russia to be imperialist, and therefore we have a side because we consider it to be a proxy war of Ukraine on behalf of the US NATO imperialists against non-imperialist Russia. There were some subsidiary questions around democratic revolutions, but the primary issue was the nature of Russia. The International Bolshevik Tendency had been in existence since 1991. So it had some period of being a common organization, but it was the nature of Russia which leads to the split.
Okay, so I prepared early question, but I thought that I will talk with comrade from International Bolshevik Tendency, but I will read this question now. It's not the question which I prepared was. I would like to ask you to introduce your organization to our viewers. I myself, long ago, during the war in Yugoslavia in 1999, I worked with the Spartakist Group of Poland, which was part of the International Communist League. And I know your organization. I also regularly meet IBT. Oh, it's
Well,
members.
it would have been the same organization back then.
I also meet at the Fête Lutuvrière in France, but some of our viewers may have never heard of you. So could you tell me who you are? How did you get up? What are you doing? What distinguishes you from the Spartakists? Do you support the Azov battalion like the Trotskys from the French NPA? So you already answered that you are not agree with the nature of Russia, but could you say more? But because for me, all this Trotsky's environment I know from the 1990s when I was very young and I was a sympathizer of the Spartakusowska Grupa Polski. So, and in this time, I heard a lot of things about international Bolshevik tendency, and most of these things which I heard was not very good.
No. So the International Bolshevik Tendency came into existence as a fusion between a North American group of Canadian and US comrades called the Bolshevik Tendency, a group in New Zealand where I am from called the Permanent Revolution Group, and a German group. The leading comrades in each of the groups had been in the Spartacist League and had either been expelled or had left the Spartacist League in the 1980s. So politically, both the International Bolshevik Tendency and the Bolshevik Tendency placed themselves in the political tradition of the early years of the Spartacist League. We consider that the Spartacist League, for various reasons, started to become something moving in the direction of a cult. Not exactly, but moving in that direction. And they started to make changes on some key political questions. It wasn't particularly consistent. They were more flip-flopping backwards and forwards on questions particularly around the Russian question, sometimes being very orientated towards the Stalinist bureaucracy, and sometimes being, we would say, ultra-left sectarian against. So they were kind of flip-flopping around. So that's kind of where we stand. We think that the Spartacist League now is a very strange organisation, particularly since the death of the long-time leader, Jim Robertson. But for a long time, they have been a group which misunderstood some key questions, we think, of their own past and of what we think is authentic Bolshevik politics as represented by the Trotsky side and the Trotsky versus Stalin schism in the Soviet Union. One of the big issues which the Spartacist League always saw as important was what is called the Russian question in our tendency. That is, what to do about the Soviet Union and the countries of Eastern Europe and China and Vietnam, etc. So what some people call actual existing socialism. So we don't consider those societies to have been socialist. We call them deformed or degenerated worker states. So these are post-capitalist societies, which in the case of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe up until the 1989-1991 period of establishment of capitalist regimes, were defendable against capitalist restoration, either external or internal. So one of the differences we have with the Spartacist League arose over what to do in August 1991. So we considered the August coup, those 3 days of the attempt to fight against Yeltsin's forces by a section of the Russian regime, to have been a defensible fight to the extent that we would have had any potential military operation or forces in Russia, we would have sided with the coup against Yeltsin and the forces at the White House. The Spartacist League think that's an incorrect position. They use various phrases around what happened after August 1991. They talk about opening the floodgates of counter-revolution, but they say that the Soviet Union remained a deformed worker state until sometime in 1992. Depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different answer about when exactly that was, and they don't point to any particular issue. They pose it more as a kind of cumulative destruction of the proletarian property forms, kind of the privatization process, along with they make an assessment that the working class was not going to act. They waited and they waited because, unfortunately, the working class in its majority did not act to defend the Soviet Union against Yeltsin's counter-revolution. And so they expected the working class to act, and finally gave up on that in some unspecified time in 1982. Since then, they've also changed their position on the national question, what to do in cases like Quebec, which is of some importance because of their historic base has been in North America. But I was never in the Spartacist League. I was recruited to the Permanent Revolution Group in New Zealand in the late 80s, and I had no experience with them until I moved to London in the mid-90s to help set up a group there the International Bolshevik Tendency. And when I met them, by that time, they were very sectarian towards the left. They would, it was very hard to have a political conversation with them because they weren't actually engaging in a discussion to achieve political clarity and understand the question at dispute. They were just looking for phrases that they could trip you up on and go. And I had this happen. Someone went, "Aha, you said that," and run across the pub to their comrade saying, "The comrade said this. What a betrayal!" And because I'd misspoken about something, used a wrong phrase. And they tend, particularly now, they've become even more sectarian. They've taken some very unusual political positions, and they don't really have a perspective of joint work with anyone else. Whereas we think that the framework of the United Front as a general strategic approach of working with other people around specific campaigns, where you agree, despite any disagreements you may have on wider political questions. So defensive strikes, defensive campaigns to defend social advances, and so on. Those are campaigns that we can be involved in because we agree with the immediate demand, despite our differences. The Spartacist League don't get involved in those campaigns because they disagree about other things, and we think that's a strategic mistake. It's only by engaging in that joint work that people become open to discussing those wider issues with you.
So your political genealogical tree is that there was the Third International, there was a split, there was created four international. After there was a split, there was the 3 or 4 organizations, and there was a split. There was a Spartakist League, there was a split, there was the International Bolshevik Tendency, there was a split, and now is the Bolshevik Tendency. Yes.
It's a sad tale. But one of the things which I found very interesting about the Spartacist League, because I was more what you might describe as a traditional Trotskyist, who tend to dominate the groups who call themselves that, and they have, for the most part, taken atrocious positions on the war in Ukraine, for instance. I remember when I arrived in Britain, I wanted to stop calling myself a Trotskyist because the people who called themselves Trotskyists were so bad, particularly around the Labour Party, which was the big question there.
You have on Polish language also the...
Yeah. So that's our for Trotskyism. That's kind of a programmatic statement of the main political questions that we see. There was a Polish comrade who was talking to us, or would have been a while ago, and he did that translation for us. We have that in a number of different languages. So the two places we have a regular publication are in English and in German. We did have a grouping or supporters in France, so we were able to produce a French journal for a few years, and we're in the process of hopefully perhaps being able to put out a Spanish journal shortly.
So my impression when I was a collaborator of the Spartakist group was that I was very young. So I will always remember these people because they pushed me to read some lectures that if I know, if this 1 year I will not, I didn't collaborate with them, maybe I will not know the books of Lenin and books of Marx, and especially Lenin, because they were interested to talk about what have to be done, state and revolution, the renegade Kautsky. and other books like this. So I am grateful to these comrades that they lost their times to me and teach me. But I had a lot now from the historic perspective. I have a lot of differences. Politic already. We finished our collaboration because all the time they talked about the Quebec question, and from Polish perspective, for me it was something that not interested me at all, and not and I uh, it was not something utile to build the workers movement in Poland, because the majority working class in Poland even don't know what is Quebec,
Okay.
what is the Quebec national question. And even if they know what is Quebec, it was the time of the very aggressive contre-revolution 1990s. This was the restoration of
Yeah.
capitalism. It was the time when the unemployment in Poland were very big. It was the time when Poland were pushed to join the NATO, also were pushed to join the European Union. It was the time and after the war in Afghanistan and the war in Yugoslavia. So a lot of interesting question, and all the time they ask me what I am thinking about the national question of Quebec. And when I said that I don't care the national question in Quebec, because in Poland we have different
Yeah.
uh, so it was one thing. A second thing, it was the time when the newspaper of the Spartakist group of Poland. It was they published articles which were published in the Workers' Vanguard. So it was a lot of articles that that for me it was a little strange that we have there was some comrade in Poland, intelligent, which can write some articles about the working question, the question of the working class in Poland, but they published the articles from the Workers' Vanguard, and the articles, for example, like the um, defense of the Michael Jackson in the time when he was
Ah,
accused of the pedophilia. And I said that I don't want to sell this newspaper about Michael Jackson. I will not defend him. It is. I am not. It is not my goal to be the communist to defend the very rich guy with his pedophilia problems and also they were not very happy that I am not agree with this line, political line of defending the one of the richest guy in the world. But the most important for me was the strategy. The strategy. I am somebody who wants to build the united movement, like I don't know, the in the time of the Cuban Revolution, of the Chinese Revolution, that only it is the slogan from the Communist Manifesto: the working class have to unite. So we search something to unite the people against bourgeoisie, against capitalism. And the Spartakists, they were never interested to unite the working class. They were always interested to divide working class, to searching, he is the traitor and he betrayed this, he betrayed that. Maybe it's true that there are a lot of traitors in the working in the leftist movement, especially now in the time in the war in Ukraine. But it's the position which were taken by the Spartakists Well, I remember the time of the war in the Yugoslavia that tried to in Warsaw create some anti-war movement, and they were people, different people from the left, but not, but also some nationalists, which wanted to. They were solidarity with Yugoslavia because the Polish people are the Slavic nation and the Yugoslavian are the Slavic nation, so we have nothing to do with these guys. But in the question of the war in Yugoslavia, they were against the bombing Yugoslavia. So they were our allies. But these guys from the Spartakis, they are. It's the psychiatric question. It's not the political question. They hate everybody and they are aggressive to everybody. And I think that I don't know. Maybe somebody is changed after 20 years because I need to say that I participated in the union in the meeting of the French Spartakist group. It was I don't know 6 years ago or 7 years ago. In the time when there was the Jeremy Corbyn, he was a leader
Yep.
of the Labour Party, and there was the meeting with the Spartakist members from Britain who started to say, "Now we are a member of the Labour Party, and in the Labour Party we are doing a lot of good job." And I, after this meeting, oh, it's changed. Why do you change? And in my time, you hated the Labour Party. Now you are a member of the Labour Party, and they were. I saw in the public that they are not happy. That some guys from the French Spartakist group, they understand my critique and they supported me, but they don't have courage to support me publicly. So it was very strange situation.
Yeah. So I don't have that close experience with the Spartans League. I've only seen them from the outside. But um, one thing that was very real about them was their United States centralization, so around the US group, and that um, what seems to have developed from talking to the older comrades um, who had been in and around the Spartacus League is that Jim Robertson became, and the close comrades around him in the US group, which dominated the international group, became particularly concerned about the development of um, oppositions internally. And so they developed a tactic which was effectively to take preemptive strikes, to look for people who were not being completely loyal and then to move against them, to either generate false allegations about them or to push them politically to say something in disagreement with the position. And this is internally. And so then they would expel people. So a culture of being afraid of raising your head was developed, and some very psychologically aggressive tactics were used because the Spartacus League has a very strong, very strong will do internal culture. So you have to commit your whole life, and you've got to be clear that you committed your whole life. And yes, that's generally true, but still, for a small propaganda group operating in on the edges of the left, who is increasingly, as you say, not engaging with other people except to say you're horrible, you're bad, and we are the true people. That makes it difficult because you've invested so much in this group. There's something that happens. There was a young guy who we were talking to in London who agreed with us on their position on Russia, but was basically afraid. We went to a protest with him on another question, Palestine, I think. And the Spartacist League just harangued him, and he just couldn't take it. They'd split up his relationship with a woman who was also around the Spartacist League, and basically he dropped out of politics. It was a terrible waste. And that they were quite happy about that. They didn't want him to join another group. Now, having said that, I do think that there are important questions which differentiate the left. How to relate to reformist groups. That's particularly a big question in Britain, with everyone falling over themselves to be in the Labour Party and make excuses for the Labour Party. We're not opposed to being in the Labour Party, but there has to be a clear sign that the Labour Party is projecting in its political activity, and particularly in its, even to some extent in its words, that the working class has separate interests from the bourgeoisie. The Labour Party mostly doesn't do that, certainly. So in recent times, Corbyn was the closest who got to that, but he was very soft on that. People did join the Labour Party. We didn't. But people did join the Labour Party on the basis that they thought that Corbyn was a socialist and was interested in achieving socialism. We thought he was still only a left social democrat, but we said we called for a vote to the Labour Party, a critical vote to the Labour Party, saying, well, you think that Corbyn is going to bring about socialism. We don't think he will, but we might be wrong. And for those people who are voting for the Labour Party because they think that Corbyn genuinely is going to overthrow capitalism, we say to you, well, we'll vote with you on that basis because we might be wrong. We don't think he will for a whole lot of reasons, and so we fill up our articles with all the reasons why Corbyn is not going to do that. So we think that when you're engaging in activity, there are other political tendencies from revolutionary Marxism. So quite often you'll meet kind of reformist, parliamentary road socialists. I had that example myself in Ireland, where I live now. There was a big campaign in the early 2013, 14, 15 around the government's attempt to bring in water charges and household charges. I live in Cork, which is the second biggest city in Ireland, and I was involved in the leadership of that campaign. And there was a political struggle against the Socialist Party and the Socialist Workers' Party, kind of what are now more traditionally known as Trotskyists, around how that campaign would be organised. And so I was encouraging a delegate-based structure of groups organised around Cork City, which would then come to a Cork-wide meeting, which would then send delegates to the national meeting. Whereas that trying to encourage the building of workers' council type, and obviously there weren't workers' councils, but in that kind of direction. And there was a real political struggle with these other comrades who are very much parliamentary road. They have TDs, parliamentarians. There are, I think, 7 members of parliament in Ireland who would describe themselves as socialists, and even privately in a pub would describe themselves as revolutionary socialists. But their actual concrete work is around struggling for reforms. And so we had a struggle with them because they wanted to move everything towards having a big committee of the kind of representatives of each of the groups who would meet in Dublin, the capital city, and then would tell the movement what to do, rather than it being bottom up, an expression of at least the beginnings of working class organisation. And so that political struggle happens a lot when you're doing joint campaigns. How will not only and so as well as being involved in campaigns, which I'm within on the Bolshevik Tendency is very much a propaganda group. It's around producing propaganda material around what we think are the major questions um, of the day internationally. I tend to be less skilled in writing that propaganda. I'm more of an activist and a campaign working class activist is more how I kind of look at myself. But and so we do that where we can, but it's a combination of those things because the working together should not be at the expense of political struggle. So in my experience in New Zealand, in Britain and in Ireland is that there are quite often what happens when you work together around a campaign where you all agree on what the demands of the campaign are, whether that's defeat the household charges, whether that's a big thing now is an eviction ban, which the government is overturning, whether it's housing's a big issue in Ireland, whether specific demands of the campaign, the things you support, immigration, attack on immigration rights is another issue which is coming up on Ireland now. That doesn't mean that you, for the period of this campaign, you have a non-aggression pact about making political criticisms or having political discussions about the things you disagree on. So you agree on these, but that doesn't mean that you shut up. Now, the Spartacus League, now within that, I think it doesn't make sense to do how the Spartacus League does, which is to say you're all scum and we're not going to work with you because you disagree on these other questions. You have to try and, because people only listen to you to the extent that you are doing the work, that you're actually building the campaign in a comrade leading non-sectarian way. So you have, and that's how you get beyond what happens quite a lot, particularly on the Trotskyist left, but not only that, I've seen it with the Communist Party of Ireland, is that you have what I like to call set piece debates, where you go along, there's some forum, and you have a discussion, and you know what's going to happen. There isn't actually an engagement. You don't actually have a real conversation where the strengths and weaknesses of my position or the strengths and weaknesses of your position are discussed in a real way. What instead you just end up yelling at each other because you know that you disagree before you went in. You're not having a real discussion. Whereas if you're involved in a real campaign, what happens is which is actually has a kind of some degree of workers' democracy where there's discussion, a climate of political discussion, not just only around the tactics for the campaign, but those will obviously spread into wider discussions. And we think that's very important in how you can engage with people who aren't revolutionaries, who don't think of themselves as revolutionaries, but think of themselves as leftists or socialists in some way. That you can say, well, we're fighting together on this. What does that mean about these other things?
Okay, I will read now the question about the historic things. It will be difficult. I don't know, difficult or not. We will see. I would like to ask how you define the word Bolshevism. For me, Bolshevism is the synonymous with the strategy of the Russian communists, which was laid out in Lenin's book, What Have to Be Done. And on this basis, there was a division in the Russian labor movement into supporters of Lenin and his opponents who did not support him. Such opponents were Martov, Plekhanov, Trotsky, and many other Russian Marxists. Fortunately, Trotsky himself wised up and joined the Bolshevik Party 3 months before the victory of the revolution. But in the previous year, Trotsky had different views and different methods of operation than the Bolsheviks. According to Bolshevik Tendency, in the years 1904, 1917, who was right, the Bolsheviks or Trotsky?
Well, there are during that period, we think that Trotsky was wrong on the organizational question. He still considered that um, the best perspective was unity between the Bolshevik faction and the various, probably the left wing of the Menshevik faction, to the extent you can just say there were those two groups, because clearly within them there were subgroupings. And that's the dog.
Hello to your dog.
Yeah, he's, he's a big dog, very excitable, and still really only a puppy. Um, but we would say that what is to be done, and the initial break between what became to be known as the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, was the beginning of what was to become Bolshevism. That initially it was primarily over organizational questions, um, over the beginnings of what now many people understand as democratic centralism. So if you were a member, you should be making a commitment, you should be working for the organization, um, you would have a leadership, um, as opposed to the Mensheviks, who were more um, willing to have members who would not do very much necessarily. They had less internal discipline. So the Bolsheviks had more of an internal discipline around issues. That develops so that increasingly the Mensheviks, the political basis of the split becomes more developed over time, particularly as you get closer to the revolution. And in that process, Trotsky and other left Mensheviks, he was in a small group called the Internationalists, I think. But not only him, many of the best anarchists were won over as well, were won to the Bolsheviks. And because politically, Trotsky had shared a lot with the and kind of political framework with the Bolsheviks. He just thought, incorrectly in our view, that it was a mistake to have two separate organizations. And when he came to understand the importance of that, and I think that was probably in the context of what was happening with the Mensheviks and their international fellow travelers in the context of World War One, and the degree of political betrayal that occurred from those forces. And so Trotsky's put in a position where he is forced to understand that this is not just some organizational issue, but it is a real political issue. So we would say that Bolshevism, as a rounded political perspective, arises in the towards the end of that period rather than the beginning. The organizational split led to the development of the political perspectives and the deepening of the political divisions, which become codified for us in the, particularly in the positions of the first four congresses of the Comintern.
But don't you think that all the history of the Trotskyist movement, the sad history of the small intellectual groups where are a lot of splits and not many successes of the victorious revolution, all these things it's depend of the life of Trotsky before the October Revolution, that the split was between, in one side, the organization which tried to organize the working class people in the disciplined, massive revolutionary organization, and in the other side, we have some intellectuals, revolutionary intellectuals, which in the psychological level they can't be a member of the big disciplined organization because they are intellectuals and because they don't respect the working class, which are not so much educated like them. We see in these polemics in many books and articles when Trotsky describes Stalin, he describes him like an idiot or the Asiatic barbaric from the Caucasus. He was not illiterate. He didn't speak the foreign languages. All these things, which is disrespect, and also the question that the Trotsky, he never worked in the factory. He was born in the family privileged families of the kulaks in Ukraine, and because of this, after all the attempt to create some Trotsky's organization was always small, always only for the students and intellectual, and very often split after split and after split, and never a victorious revolution.
Okay, I think that your characterization of the Bolsheviks is incorrect. I mean, one could make the same criticisms of Lenin. He was trained to be a lawyer. He was from a well-off family. He didn't work in a factory. What he was a political writer, and that's what he was. He was a political leader. What is different about the organizations is that the Bolsheviks, as I understood it, and I don't think this is true 100%, but the Bolsheviks put more emphasis on forming study groups of workers than the Mensheviks did. I think that's true at the time, and so that Bolsheviks were more proletarian than the Mensheviks, but that's not completely true. The Mensheviks had certainly significant support and were a large organization with many workers as members. The reality is that you're going to need people who are what would be called intellectuals. That seems to be the case. It's not just that Trotskyist groups are led by intellectuals. There's plenty of professors and so on in amongst all the currents across all the left. And it's a potential danger for any political group if you become too reliant on creating a group in the image of those people. And it's true that many, not just Trotskyists, but other groups will try to recreate themselves in the image of their leaders. I mean, the reality is that in the time since Trotskyism has been an independent tendency as something, and we think it's just a continuation of those politics of Bolshevism, of the Russian Revolution in the first years of the Communist International, against the Stalinist betrayal of key elements of that, the internationalism betrayal of that, betrayal of working class independence with the idea of the Popular Front, and so on. There's a overturning of key political positions. But something else happened to the Trotskyists. Their forces were devastated in World War II, not just by the Nazis, but also by the Cheka and the Stalinists. And they came out of that, and unfortunately, a majority of what was Trotskyism and the leaders chose a perspective. They considered themselves, well, we're too small, so we've got to stop arguing for our politics and instead either try and join the big communist parties, where these are big social formations, or to join Labour parties where these are big formations. And that this idea, which we call Pabloism, after Michel Pablo, the key guy who developed it, along with Ernest Mandel, this has infected what now is mostly known as Trotskyism. So that it's about being involved in campaigns, but don't raise your politics. Be in parliament, but don't talk too much about revolution. Just try and keep where you think the most advanced sections of the working class are, and don't say anything which might make yourself unpopular by talking about revolutionary politics.
I am not agree with this word betrayal of the revolution, because
Okay.
from the perspective of the history of the Soviet Union, when we compare the time when the leader was Trotsky and Lenin,
Well, he was never the leader. Oh, yeah. Okay. And Lenin, yeah.
And so it was the time when firstly it was the socialist revolution in 1917, but because in the place of the building socialism, the Bolshevik party organized the biggest privatization in the world, and the land was given to the peasants, not collectivized. And also we didn't have a socialist politics in economy, but we have the comeback of the capitalism in the new economic policy. So from the economic perspective, the 1920s was the capitalism with the leading role of the Bolshevik party. And when Trotsky was expelled from the Bolshevik party and expelled from the Soviet Union, Stalin and the new leaders of the Bolshevik party, they started to create socialism in Soviet Union. So when I tried to compare the 1930s and the 1920s from the perspective of the working class, from the perspective of the building socialism, the time after Trotsky is better than the time when the Trotsky was in the power.
Okay, I understand that. So if we look at why the NEP was undertaken, why did they do that? And it was against the general perspective which is outlined in all the political documents of the Bolsheviks. There's nothing in the early Comintern which says, well, we're going to do this. But something happens because socialism is not a project for one country. Socialism is an international perspective, and everyone, all the Bolshevik, all the elements of the Bolsheviks understood this and agreed with this. Stalin and everybody. It wasn't everyone understood that Russia was a break in the world capitalist hegemony, but the revolution had to spread. Everyone thought that if we don't spread the revolution, it's going to be very difficult for us to survive, and probably a capitalist counter-revolution is the likely outcome. And so they spend a lot of time and effort and emphasis on particularly encouraging the German possibilities of a German revolution, because that was the biggest organized working class in Europe, which had the most militant wing to it. And so the failures, and for various reasons, the failures of the attempts at a revolution in Germany increasingly made it difficult for the Soviet Union, because you've had the Civil War, which is actually a proxy war by world imperialism inside of the Soviet Union, and things that are very, very bad. very, very bad. So I don't know what I would have done if I was there when the leadership of the Bolsheviks comes up with the idea of the NEP. The cities are starving, and so they go, "What the fuck are we going to do?" And so they come up with this idea. And yes, that idea has allows them to survive, but it also has other elements to it. And I think it's not a good thing to let capitalism develop inside a worker state. That's a bad idea. That's a sign of weakness. But they were weak, and so they did it. And it's very hard to look back and to say, well, that was a bad idea because of everything that came after it. They were still hoping that the revolution would happen, the revolution would spread. They were doing all they could. They built the International. They're trying to spread the ideas of international revolution. And they make this huge concession, dangerous concession of the NEP, because you have the strengthening of the kulak layer in the peasantry. Trotsky is, not everyone agrees exactly about the NEP. Trotsky talks about, rather than alliance with the whole of the peasantry, you should be focusing on the poor peasantry, the worker peasants. But those are kind of secondary differences. Then you have so the period in response to that in the 1930s, when you have all the things that happen under Stalinism, you have the physical annihilation of the bulk of the old Bolshevik leadership, not just Trotsky, but hundreds, thousands are sent to the gulags for various crimes, supposed crimes. And you have a change in the Communist Party of Russia. And Lenin talks about this as being something that's developing, because the perspective that of communism, particularly on the question of the state, is that after a revolution, there will be a state, but it will be a state of a new kind, a state in the process of withering away, of becoming something different from the state which we understand under capitalism or even feudalism. It becomes a different kind of social formation, a different kind of social governance. State and Revolution, I think it's the best individual work, and certainly had the most impact on my political consciousness, what he outlines in there. But instead, you have an increasingly strong state. It's not that the state isn't withering away. And the NEP feeds into that, because suddenly you've got this whole capitalist class who are problematic for all kinds of reasons. And so you're having to control them. And so there is a process whereby the Communist Party has changed. I've been involved in many discussions about, well, what could you have done differently? And I don't know. I don't know what I would have done if I was there. Would I have been in the workers' opposition? Would I have been in the democratic centrist opposition? I don't know. Maybe. Would I have been enthusiastic supporters of all the things which the Lenin Trotsky leadership was in favour of? I don't know. But they did what they did. And the question of the idea that I would disagree strongly that when the NEP was rolled back with the forced collectivisation and the movement towards effectively removing any elements of capitalist production in the Soviet Union, I don't think that's socialism per se. I think that it is post-capitalist arrangement, but I don't think that socialism and communism is just an economic arrangement. It's also a social. It's about social relations, and so the elements of working class democracy, which are not present after that period, you have a very hierarchical, controlling arrangement with the workers' councils, which were only beginning to develop in the first years of the revolution, are gone. There's no workers' democracy in the sense which Lenin outlines it in State and Revolution, and as it was understood in those terms by the people carrying out the Russian Revolution. And so that's why I wouldn't call it socialism. I think it's still a post-capitalist society, and we use this phrase to form worker state, that it was a healthy worker state, which politically degenerated under Stalin. And so why we think that is because there are many, many elements to the program of revolutionary Marxism, but some of them are more key than others. Internationalism is absolutely key, because the idea that there could be socialism in one country is not an idea which anyone held until after what happened to the Soviet Union happened, and people said, the leaders of the Soviet Union said, well, we've got socialism in one country. It was never an idea. Everyone was committed that this had to be international and the revolution had to spread. Working class independence, absolutely essential. And it's something which you butt up against the reformist socialists all the time. They want to make deals and parliamentary deals and all this kind, look for the progressive bourgeoisie. And what happens under Stalinism? Because the idea of we have got socialism in this country against the hostile capitalist world, we've got to look to make deals with the progressive capitalists. And so this idea of the Popular Front, political blocks, military blocks, political blocks, joint political platforms with the progressive bourgeoisie becomes part of what communism under Stalinism is. And that's a betrayal of a key element of revolutionary Marxism, independence of the working class, political independence of the working class. You don't join in joint platforms. You don't form joint organizations like the Kuomintang. You don't do that. The Popular Front has been responsible for the defeat of so many revolutionary situations. It's been a key element in those defeats. China, France, Spain, Chile, many, many. And so that's why I say that Stalinism represents a betrayal, is it betrays on key elements of the revolutionary program, particularly internationalism, particularly working class independence. But it still represents, despite the political regime which has betrayed on those two key elements and has built an international movement which has infused the communist parties from the 30s on with those ideas, it's still, the reintroduction of capitalism would be a defeat. And so Trotsky's idea that you're going to need what he called a political revolution, and to reintroduce the rule of the working class through workers' council type formations, through Soviet type formations, again, to get rid of the bureaucracy who have usurped power away from the mass of the working class, and to separate that out. You have to defend it against capitalism, because capitalism would be worse. And I think that what happened in Eastern Europe and Russia has proven that definitively. I know this was some of the worst social disasters that have occurred in recent human history.
So I think that if we use this word betrayal, it's not betrayal in the time of the Stalin, but more a few months or few years after the revolution. Even the Rosa Luxemburg, when they wrote about the Bolshevik Revolution, she wrote that the privatization of the land, it is against the socialist program, and after the incorporation of the new economic policy, it is also against the socialist program. The question is why we fight for socialism. I fight for socialism because it's the system more justice than capitalism, but also in the from the economic perspective is more efficacious than capitalism. So if we have the economic problems, it's better to build socialism than to build the capitalism. And from history, we have a lot of example. We have example of the Eastern Germany when they started to change the economic of the East Germany. They didn't privatize land, introduce the some called of capitalism, and few years later they have this problem of kulaks and bourgeoisie, and they need to make the forced collectivization. They make this from first day. The also similar politics was in Cuba when the Fidel announced that the Cuba will build the socialism. They nationalized the all these plantation, and from the economic perspective, it was very good idea. So I
Yep.
think that from the tragedy of the Soviet Union was that
Ah, the NEP.
from the first day they didn't introduce the socialist program, and the Stalin, when he take power, he returned to normality, he returned to socialism, he returned
Ah,
to
okay.
all these things, and the repression against the leader of the Bolshevik party was from my perspective was normal, because most of these people were responsible for introducing capitalism, were responsible also for corruption. We see only all this society when we have communist party with element of capitalism, that there is a lot of corruption. The Soviet Union was destroyed because of this, that in 1980s there was a lot of bureaucracy guys who wanted to make their own business. So the repression of the guy who said, I am a member of the Bolshevik party, but I am also bourgeoisie. This is the problem of the China today, that we have the milliardaires in the Communist Party. And yes, I supported the repression against the milliardaires in the Communist Party, because the Communist Party is the party for the working class, not for the bourgeoisie. And the guys who are using the communist legitimation to make reach themselves, to make business. So one more time, I can't understand how all these things which you said, it's something that Stalin is bad guy, the betrayal, but don't talk about the most important things, that the what is the socialist program for the Russia,
Okay.
what was the why the introduction of the new economic policy was a betrayal, and why the how important to building to the socialist movement in the world, because these things which Stalin made in 1929 and after, it was before that, all the anti-communist propaganda can say, look to the Russia. They are the some communists. They take power, but if they take power, nothing changed, because all the time we have the capitalism relations in the land, in the industry. We have you are organizing to the communist movement, but after revolution nothing changed. The big change
Ah,
start the big changes started when the after the collectivization, the Soviet Union shown to the world we can make the society, we can make the economy without exploiters?
Okay, I would say two things. Firstly, is the question of the degree of um, capitalist mode of production which the NEP represented. I think that the analogy with China is useful there, because if you look at what's happened in China, the CPC has allowed a huge amount of capitalist cancer inside Chinese society, encouraged it. Um, but the NEP was not at that level. It was within the framework of the mode of production remaining predominantly post-capitalist. The land is important because Russia has a huge peasant population. But in terms of production, it wasn't that capitalist enterprises dominated in the way which or formed a proportion of the productive forces which you see in China today. And it's not just that, and the idea that for me to think that Stalin represented a figure who was the kind of held to this true socialism and that would not have made this concession. Where's the evidence for that? Where's the evidence of Stalin opposing the NEP?
No, he wasn't.
Stalin doesn't oppose the NEP. This was a question. What to do about the NEP is not an easy question. It's being discussed. Trotsky comes up with the program for collectivization as a way to deal with the problems which are being posed by the NEP. He doesn't see it as forced collectivization, but there are many elements of the left opposition's program for the land and what to do, how to deal with this problem of the rise of the kulaks and the development, the growth of the cancer of capitalism within the Soviet Union, are taken by Stalin, just with the forced nature, which did make it quicker, obviously. But it's not that Stalin is unique amongst the Bolsheviks and going, oh, bloody hell, this thing which we did, which we were hoping would be a short-term thing, which while we're still hoping for the revolution in Western Europe, is just becoming more and more problematic. What are we going to do about it? I don't know. I'm not well read enough to be able to look at all the different responses there are to that, to know all them, to know the difference. Bukharin has, and there are people who say, well, we need to go further, right? But then there are people who say we don't need to go as far. There's a lot of discussion in the Bolshevik Party about this question. What would have happened, what could have happened to deal with that problem didn't have to be this. The problem had to be dealt with. I agree with you. The problem in the NEP had to be dealt with, but how would it be dealt with? I think that collectivization and collectivizing agricultural production was the way to go. And perhaps they could have, with hindsight, they should have done that. They could have done that instead of going down the NEP. But they did what they did. But for me to say that, it seems to me that you're reducing the idea of socialism to purely being post-capitalist. So that if there's zero capitalist economic relations, we've got socialism. I don't think that's true, because I look at the Soviet Union, and the very fact that the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe collapsed in the way they did eventually. Well, that had like 80 years of socialism, and they collapsed with barely a whimper. With the working class, to the extent that it acted, mostly it was passive, but to the extent it acted on the side of the capitalist restorationists against their socialist leadership. That doesn't seem coherent to me as an understanding. Why would you have had 80 years of this unless you're going, well, when Stalin died, it was all Khrushchev, and he introduced all these things, all these bad things, but he didn't change the economic framework in the Soviet Union, and there wasn't. And you can maybe say that Gorbachev with Glasnost that there's a bit of a development of capitalism, but it's still minor on the edges. It's not until Yeltsin takes power that you have the opening of the floodgates for capitalist restoration, when the Americans rush in and so on, and you've got the chaos which occurs after that. So socialism for me, yes, it is a post-capitalist perspective, but this thing which except maybe Rosa Luxemburg. There are some things in what Rosa Luxemburg says about the hyper-centralized way that the Bolshevik Party organised, that this would lead to a devaluing of workers' democracy. She's right about her that's wrong. I don't know what I would have done about the NEP. Her criticism of the NEP, where you can go back and say, well, that did lead to these problems, which was problematic. But lost my thread.
Okay, so I think that we can imagine that all the good stuff which Stalin make was not his program, it was program of Trotsky, and Stalin, he take these things of Trotsky, he steal his program. From this
for the land,
perspective,
yeah.
Okay. So I don't understand why the Trotsky movement used the word betrayal of the revolution, because if he take the program of Trotsky and make this program in the reality, the Trotsky's movement have to be bravo,
Okay.
Stalin,
Okay.
you take it's a betrayal of Trotsky, yes, but it's not a betrayal of the revolution, because he take the program of Trotsky. And yes, I am agree with you that the socialism, it's not only economic system. For me, the socialism is the system which liberate the working class people, the working class, and also the people from the land, the peasants. And the things which from me, because I am emigree, I am worker, I'm from Poland, but I am working in France. I'm in the bottom of the society, like the immigrant worker. And the one things which I don't it's I am against after the October Revolution, that in before October Revolution we have the society, we divided society from the privileged class, intellectuals, from the nobles or the bourgeoisie, and we have the people, working people in the bottom. And after revolution, when we see the direction of the Bolshevik party, we see that this division still exists. That we have the Trotsky or Lenin, who are in the leaders of the new society, but they came from this privileged classes. So the difference in the time of Stalin, that we have a lot of workers, a lot of people from the bottom, which in the history of the humanity, they have their ancestors were never have possibility to be educated, never have possibility to take power. And the Soviet Union is it became a first state in the world when the people from working class starting to make a decision, and it is the revolutionary difference from the Russia and other capitalist countries or feudal countries, which when the power is reserved only for the privileged classes. And in Soviet Union we see that we have the people in power like Stalin. He was the son of the worker in the shoes factory, and the woman which are servant and stuff like this. And a lot of these new allies of Bolsheviks party, which were not allied before the revolution, for me it is something good that we make revolution for this, that now the people from the working class have something to say in the new society. And if the people who are in the privileged classes, okay, they have good I from my perspective, Trotsky, he made good job in the time of the revolution, he made good job in the time of the civil war, but after it's a time, okay, because all my life I lived in the privileged life, now I will be a normal member of the party, and the power in the party is for the workers, not for me, because me and my family and our we came from different class. We are not doing workers revolution to make a bourgeois and nobles in the direction of this revolution. We are making the workers revolution to make to have workers in the power of the workers state. Workers state.
Okay, but workers being working class sociologically, i.e., from your family and relationship to the means of production, so you have to sell your labour power. That doesn't necessarily mean anything about what you might do, because if we look at what, so I know people have done analysis of this and looking at the kind of census data of the attendees at congresses of the Communist Party, for instance, and you can look at that and the section who are delegates who are workers, the section of delegates who are intellectuals or whatever. That analysis exists. I'm not as sure as you are that the Communist Party in the 1930s and 1940s, for instance, is necessarily in its makeup more proletarian than the Bolshevik Party, the Communist Party, prior to Stalin taking over. I just don't know, but I'm not so clear as you are that there's a qualitative difference. Certainly, if you look at what this party, what these leaders did, that the form of social organisation that they created, they don't create social relations which are facilitating mass working class participation in decision making. They don't do that. What instead happens is you have the development of a kind of caste layer. So if you are born into the bureaucracy, you get to go to university. You get to get a good job in the bureaucracy. Generally, that's what happened. They didn't create a society which was one which encouraged working class mass participation in the governance of society. Yes, there's many things that they do which are supportable, but they didn't do that. So how I don't know, even to the extent that you're correct, and I don't know, as I've said, that the majority of the new leadership of the Russian Communist Party post the transformation in the late 20s and 30s, um, that is overwhelmingly proletarian in its sociological makeup. I look at the society that produced, and in terms of the question of social governance, it's not one which um, encourages and facilitates mass working class political representation and in direct involvement in the governments in social governance, as per um, the perspective outlined in State and Revolution, and in what everyone pretty much was saying at the meetings of the Communist International in the early years, including Stalin. Stalin had this idea of the need to produce the kind of state power which developed, and a bureaucratic layer who had certainly nothing like the social privileges of the capitalist class in capitalist societies, but still had um, a layer of privilege just on the basis of that you were born into a bureaucratic family, a family involved in the high levels of bureaucracy. That's the society they created. That it was out of that layer, different from the capitalist class, not the same. I'm not saying it's a class, but still, it was the layer that was separated from the mass of the working class. I mean, do you accept what I'm describing of what the Soviet Union became and then was replicated in countries of Eastern Europe? Or do you think I'm describing something that didn't really exist, and that the kind of mass of the workers were involved in the social governance of society? Am I just
I think
mistaken? Am I just mistaken in that?
I think that when we talk about the families of the bureaucracy, the very important example is the son of Stalin, who died in the Second World War, Yakov Djugashvili. He was in German prisoner, and he was executed because Stalin didn't wanted to exchange him for the some marshal of the Wehrmacht. And it is totally different from the perspective of the capitalist leaders. For example, now when we have war in Ukraine, the leaders of Russia, they send they sons to the places where they can be mobilized to the army. The leaders of Ukraine make the same things. So in normal capitalist war, we have the situation when the politics and bourgeoisie, they starting the war, but in the war it is the working class who died. In the war where is the Soviet Union, even the son of Stalin fight like a normal soldier and die like a normal soldier. So it's shown as this example that we didn't have privilege, that it is totally different from all these capitalist states where for example, Britain, where when we see that Prince Harry, when he was in Afghanistan, he was 20 bodyguards to protect him, to not kill him because.
And the study meeting is. Sorry.
Uh, okay, I'll read a question, another which I prepare,
Yeah, yeah.
different subject. Now I would like to ask about your attitude towards Trotsky writings. In 1949, Trotsky wrote several articles about Ukraine in which he demanded an independent Ukraine, i.e., Ukraine's detachment from the Soviet Union. The Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic was a multinational state inhabited by Ukrainian speaking, Russian speaking Jews and other national minorities, and there were no ethnic conflicts in this multinational republic in the times of the USSR. Such ethnic conflicts were wanted by Ukrainian nationalists who were actively supported by the Third Reich. And when the Nazis attacked the USSR, the Banderites started to carry out ethnic cleansing. Why did Trotsky support the Bandera postulate of an independent Ukraine and the breakup of the USSR? Do you support Trotsky on this issue? I believe that the slogan of an independent Ukraine in the face of the threat of the Nazism was a counter-revolutionary slogan, and Trotsky also bears part of the responsibility for today's drama in the Donbass.
I have a different understanding of what Trotsky's position was.
This is this accurate article.
Okay. I don't. Okay, that's very quick. My understanding of Trotsky's position, and maybe I'll be misled on this, it's not something that I've studied, Trotsky's position on the Ukraine, but my understanding is that Trotsky called for not for independence full stop, but for the right to independence as a worker state. That it wasn't just support that Ukraine should be independent irrespective of the social relations, that part of the understanding of the formation of the Soviet Union was that you could have separation. That was an initial position. And Trotsky said, well, if the Ukrainian socialists, for whatever reason, want to separate and set up a separate Ukrainian worker state, we would support that. I don't think that Trotsky is just saying, well, I don't think Trotsky's saying that he supports independence full stop. If in fact Trotsky does support independence full stop, then I think he's wrong for the reasons you outlined.
Yes, because this article was published in the time after Anschluss of Austria and after the destroying of Czechoslovakia. And it was the time of the expansion of the Third Reich. And in this time, even if this independent Ukraine will be workers or socialists or communist independent Ukraine, it's make the break in the Red Army, it's make Soviet Union weaker. And the Hitler, he never he always said that his biggest enemy is the communism. It is why this alliance with Japan and Italy is named the Anti-Comintern Bloc, that the bloc against the Third International. But you are saying that that for you it's a mistake of Trotsky, yes?
If he's saying what you said he said, I mean, the question of, so on the setting up of a separate state does not mean the breaking of all relations with of a Soviet Ukraine, would not mean that they would take an independent path. It's not. There you go, Soviet Ukraine.
Yes, Soviet Ukraine, but in the time when the Wehrmacht is preparing to attack, prepare to attack the Soviet Union, and you know all these tactics of the colored revolution used by the imperialists in the last 20-30 years, it's the tactic which are mobilized masses in the leftist slogans when we try to analyze the Maidan in Ukraine in 2013 2014. The people were against oligarchic system, against corruption. So it is some demands which the leftists or even communists can support. But it is they organize this only in the countries or against the government which are not totally obeyed to the Western countries. So they never support the movement like this in the center of the NATO.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that, but to transpose that back onto the situation existing in the Ukraine in 1939 when Trotsky is writing this. It's conditional on Trotsky's position that something has, which you disagree with, that something has gone very wrong in the Soviet Union by this time in terms of the question of social governance, and that he's come to the position, rightly or wrongly, but he's come to the position that a political revolution to introduce some kind of social governance based on the organs of workers' democracy, such as Soviets, is necessary. It's necessary to overthrow the idea of socialism in one country and détente. It's necessary to overthrow the idea of popular frontism. You need that political revolution to occur. If you have that idea, as Trotsky says in here, quickly glancing through this article, that if you are someone who poses everything in terms of the if you see the Stalinized Communist Party as a continuer of socialism, then of course you're going to be opposed to this idea, because necessarily it's bound up in a conception that Trotsky he links it explicitly with a struggle against the Bonapartist caste, which he thinks has taken political power and is opposed to socialism as he understands it, and as was the socialism being espoused by the Russian Revolution. Something has happened there. So he argues that there's a problem in the Soviet Union, which grants the right in its constitution, in the USSR constitution, to independence for republics, but then denies this to Ukraine. There's no reason why a Soviet Ukraine would not fight alongside the rest of the Soviet Union. Why is that the case? I mean, but it's based on the idea that he's projecting the idea that you need to break the control that the bureaucracy has over social governance. And I don't know to what extent that this is manifest in. He's not making this up. And there are calls amongst communists in the Ukraine for this, which he's engaging with. He's saying, I support your cause. Now, he's saying, I don't. If the balance of forces is such that this was being, what you say, a colour revolution, to project it a long way forward in the future. If the forces mobilising for this were that, then you wouldn't be talking about a Soviet Ukraine. You'd be talking about something else. So therefore, he wouldn't write this article. So it's a kind of, perhaps to the extent that we would disagreeing about this, it's because of that underlying factor of what do we think about the regime and forms of social governance which have been established in the Soviet Union under Stalin. Because you might accept perhaps that there are some problems about that because they lead to corruption and all those kind of things, and the bureaucracy does to some extent kind of become separated, and clearly there's no development of Soviets and so on. I don't know how important you think those are. I think they're pretty important to the project. You're developing a new kind of state which withers away, and that necessitates these kind of structures. It seems to me that you're saying that, well, okay, there are those problems, but that's less important, or that's that the importance of the effective removal of all forms of capitalist production, that's much, much more important than those things. Whereas I think Trotsky's right. He says, well, that's a reason that you're going to put your body on the line if capitalism tries to be reintroduced. You'll defend this, even though you think that there's a real problem with it. You'll defend it against capitalism, yes, but that doesn't mean that there doesn't need to be a political struggle to fight for the ideas of the rule of the working class for the organs of workers' democracy. And that's how I understand this. He's hoping, probably, maybe he knows, I don't know enough about the history of exactly what the dynamics going on in the Ukraine are, which lead Trotsky to write this article. It's got to be some combination that he thinks, well, I've got some co-thinkers there, or people are thinking things along these same kind of lines. Plus, I hope that they're going to become, maybe there's some degree of that this will be a fuse which will allow those ideas of proletarian democracy as the form of social governance to spread. And so I think the difference between us is on this question of this example and the wider question of how to relate to the leadership of the Soviet Union post the 1930s, and then the leaderships of the Eastern European states, which become part of the wider Soviet bloc. That I think our difference is something to do with that, about how we should relate to that bureaucratic layer, which, for the purposes of this discussion, I will concede and say, well, that comes out of much more proletarian base. I don't know if that's true, but let's say even if it was, it still created something which wasn't anything. Well, no, that's not true. That's too big a statement. Which in the important element of social relations, of social governance, is something very, very different from what's outlined in all the major works of communism. It's not what the kind of perspective that Marx and Engels are projecting for how society will develop. It's not what all the Bolsheviks are saying, which is kind of codified, I think, in State and Revolution, about what the state will be like, or the state in the process of withering away, which state of a new kind, because it's withering away. I give that a lot of weight. Maybe I give that too much weight, but it doesn't mean that I'm not defensist. And there is a problem for me as someone who calls himself a Trotskyist, is because most people who call themselves Trotskyists give that so much weight that they weren't prepared to defend the Soviet Union against counter-revolution in 1991. That's a problem with me in terms of terminology, but in terms of what I understand, I disagree with most Trotskyists on that, because they bend that stick so far that they won't defend the Soviet Union against capitalist restoration. Whereas our difference is that you don't think that, as far as I understand it, that a struggle to introduce Soviet type forms of social governance, and to get rid of the bureaucratic caste which stands in the way of that, is particularly important. Or certainly not important, as that's once again too categorical. It's much less important than the importance that I give to it. Would you say that's fair?
You know, this article is interesting me because we know the history, we know what's was happened later, and also
Yeah.
we know the strategy of the imperialist circles, how they wanted to destroy the socialism. When after the October Revolution, there was the imperialist intervention in Russia. The strategy where they use were not efficient because they said we want to restore the Tsarism, or we support some military dictatorship. We support Denikin or Wrangel, or guys like this, and the working class of the Russia didn't support the imperialists. So they changed their strategy, and they invited new strategy to destroy the socialist state, to promote some nationalism, separatism, to destroy from the to cut this country to the national borders. And the restoration of capitalism in Soviet Union was not because they want to restore the capitalism. It was because there was the independence of Lithuania, after other Baltic states, after independence of the Ukraine, Belarus, and they decided, okay, we destroy the Soviet Union. The same was in the Yugoslavia, that to promote the counter-revolution, they promote the ethnic nationalism and separatism. And it's very funny when we see how they how they treat the separatist movement in the countries where they define like the enemies, how they define the separatist movement in China. They support the Uyghur, they support the Tibet, they support Hong Kong, they support Taiwan, all the national minorities. They support to destroy the united big countries, but in the same time, they are against the separatism in Corsica. They are against the separatism, I don't know, in Catalonia, in Britannia, in Scotland, in Ireland the North, in Welsh, and separatism is good, but to our enemy, separatism in Donbass. No, we are not supporting separating Donbass. So you see all this hypocrisy, but the same time they said Kosovo is good, but the Uyghur are good, but Donbass separatism. No. It's totalitarian Russian. It's green people of Putin who make this. So because we understand the politic of the imperialist circles, from in the time when the Trotsky, he didn't he couldn't know what will happen a few years later in Ukraine. He didn't know that the Banderites came after the Nazis, and they starting to make the ethnic cleansing and all this genocide which were taking place in Ukraine. So he's not responsible for all these uh, things which are happen later. But now, from the historic perspective, when we know what was the strategy to destroy socialism and what happened in Ukraine, I think that this article it's very not good.
Okay. Okay. But I think you're looking at it in terms of with hindsight, because what if a independent Soviet Ukraine led by Trotskyists had been established? What would have happened then? You're projecting what happened, and because therefore this would have been a bad thing. But all you're taking is the independence element of it.
Yes, yes, I think that if we have independent Soviet Ukraine, after we will have the independent Caucasus Republic Soviet, we have another, and it will split, and it will be weaker and weaker. And after
Why?
when the Hitler
Why would it be weaker and weaker?
and why the Communist Manifesto is finish of the word working class unite, because when we are unite, we are stronger. When we are divide, we are weaker.
Yes, but once again, this goes back to the question of how you understand the leadership of the Soviet Union at the time. So you're because working class unity can be a good thing and it can be a bad thing. The working class,
Why bad thing working
well,
class
okay,
unity?
the working class in the years up to World War One, in the period to World War One, was united behind the war of their country. There was no there were there's and this was the socialist movement, and so you have 1914. You only have a couple of people vote against war credits. The German social democracy, the most powerful and strongest and absolutely proletarian organisation, in its bulk, vast majority supports the war. Unity of the working class, comrade. The unity of the working class that we are concerned about. At times, the working class supports the politics of the bourgeoisie. In Ireland today, the vast bulk of workers vote for bourgeois parties. I mean, does that mean? Well, what does that mean? We are unity for the working class in the struggle to overthrow capitalism and to introduce socialism as the first stage of communism. That's the unity of the working class we're interested in. We're not interested in unity of the working class behind the most organisations that call themselves Trotskyist, because they just want to play their parliamentary games. And they don't even understand the Popular Front. And they'll form Popular Front alliances with the progressive bourgeoisie. Do we want that unity? I don't. The unity is important, but it's not the end of the story. There's not just whatever unity is good. Is it? Surely? I mean, it might. Do you get the point I'm trying to make? I mean,
Yes, yes.
at the revolution if you look at the working class in Russia in 1917, the unity of the working class was, for a good period of 1917, behind the Mensheviks. They had all the delegates plus the SRs. It's not until the Bolsheviks that the unity of the working class through its politically active members organized in the Soviets takes on and supports the program being put forward by the Bolsheviks, that the revolution becomes a possibility. I mean, the working class was united, but under different political leaderships. Unity of the working class is necessary, but it's not. But it's necessary if we're concerned about the end of capitalism and the creation of communism. It's unity of the working class around revolutionary politics. And so the question, yeah, that'll do. You can
Yes,
come back to that.
yes. I think that in the question of the starting First World War, Nobody asked the working class what do they think. It was only the question of some deputies in the parliamentaries, maybe, I don't know, 100 or 200 people, who represented politically the German social democracy. But it was not a referendum of all the working class in Germany. You support or you are against the war. No, they corrupted or push, I don't know, treated to going to prison the allies of the social German social democracy, and that's all. That it is the treason of the leaders, but nobody asked the German working class or French working class what do they think about war, because
Okay.
they were against the war, I think.
Well, there was a mass movement against the war led by those leaders, but the and I accept that as a criticism. There was no referendum taken. I mean, the only way that you can judge is by what those organisations did, and in their bulk, those organisations supported the war. But I accept that your criticism of that position is accurate, and
Yes,
I can't.
because I don't know,
I can't. None of us can know.
2 year or 3 year before the starting of war, there was a congress, I think that in Stuttgart,
Yeah,
when all the delegates of the working organization in Europe decided that in the time of war they will make general strike.
yeah, but no one did. Well, that's too sweeping. But generally speaking, they didn't. So yes, and you could say that's a betrayal of the leadership, um, and that the working class didn't want to go to war. But and certainly that there are the German social democracy was not a perfect manifestation of workers' democracy, and so to the extent that there was um, widespread opposition to the war, that people believed those leaders when they said we will act against the war if it comes, and then when the war came, they didn't. And certainly the fact that revolution became a possibility in Germany in the 1920s is an indication that um, those who opposed the war eventually became predominant. But I don't know, but I'm not aware of a mass desertion of German social democracy to those who stood against it by the mass of the working class. I'm not I'm not aware that that because it's not that the entire leadership of German social democracy betrayed. Liebknecht and Luxemburg stood against that, but I'm not a, and they get murdered for it. But why? But there's not. I'm not aware of that opposition suddenly, which if in fact the betrayal was something which by the social democratic leaders was so different from the wider consciousness of the working class that it would have caused a schism, and that the vast the the millions of social democratic working class members didn't follow the opposition to that. To, so I don't because if this was such a if this historic betrayal by the leadership of German social democracy was so out of step with the feelings of the wider German working class, wouldn't we have expected to find some political expression, which I'm not aware of. Now, obviously, a betrayal like that causes massive confusion and disillusionment. Why have our leaders, as you say, they're saying we're going to do this. Now it's happened. They've flipped on their heads. That it, so so what I'm projecting isn't. I can see that there's a massive confusion, but the the idea that the war isn't popular, I'm not I'm not sure about that. But but as you say, there's no referendum and there isn't a big enough opposition, perhaps, that because the number of people who betrayed was so great and the number of people who stood against that betrayal was so small that it's not a strong enough poll for people to gravitate towards. Which isn't to say that your point is incorrect, but I'm just saying to the extent that it was, wouldn't we have seen some reflection of that?
Okay, so let's talk about the um present situation.
Okay.
Could you say something about what you are doing today, especially what is your position to war in Ukraine? Are you are active in the anti-war initiative? For example, there was a conference organized in London by George Galloway, No to War, No to NATO. Do you support this movement? Do you support other initiatives like this?
Um, well, we participate. We're a small group, but what our forces we participate in the anti-war demonstrations, even the ones which are overtly pacifist. We had comrades at uh, the London conference um, called by Galloway, um, and we participated in that conference, arguing our position. Um, we have there was a small group of um, Trotskyist groups who set up who organised some meetings against uh, the war and for a position of military victory to Russia. We participated in those conferences. We've since not got involved in that because we think that they've taken on positions which we don't agree with. They haven't limited the campaign to just opposition to the war. We have participated in a conference called by some European communists, including more what would be called Stalinist or left Stalinist groups, organised by a group called Red Med. I don't know if you've heard of them.
Red meat?
Med, short for Mediterranean.
Ah,
REDMED.
mm,
It's a kind of grouping of left Stalinist groupings. We participated in meetings with them. So we're looking for any and all opportunities to participate in opposition to the war. Obviously, if you go to the larger, so we participated in that Rage Against the Machine, which the vast bulk of the Trotskyist and anarchist left boycotted because of the involvement of right wing figures. But the demands were virtually the same as the later leftist UNAC
it is
demonstration.
this?
I think so. Yeah. They organised some meetings. Yeah. So that's a coalition of various groups.
That's in Russian and English.
Yeah. So
It's
they are
French, English, Russian, all languages which I know.
very good. Um,
And Arab, I don't speak Arab.
So we're not part of Red Med, but we participated in some meetings they had, online meetings. Yeah, so.
And what do you think about the collaboration with the forces which are not leftists in the question of the war in Ukraine? For example, in Poland, the only anti-war demonstration were organized by the radical nationalists, nationalists which are against United States, because most of the Polish patriots and nationalists are supporting NATO, and but there are some small minority which are against, and they organized demonstration in Warsaw. They organized in Bydgoszcz demonstration in the anniversary when Poland joined to the NATO. It is the 12th of March. The leader of this nationalist now is in prison. His name is Wojciech Olszański. So there are a lot of political problem with them, because they are not only nationalists, but they are anti-communist, and they are very interested to the history of the radical anti-communist movement which existed in Poland in the 1940s, which organized the guerrilla, anti-Sovietic guerrilla and terrorist activity. But so we can even say that they are like, from the historic perspective, they are fascist. But in the war in Ukraine, they are against banderites. The Polish fascists are against Ukrainian fascists. So objectively, they are making the anti-imperialist activity, and in the same time, the Polish leftists, they support banderites. So the Polish leftists, they support the Ukrainian Nazis, and the Polish Nazis, they are against the Ukrainian Nazis. And in this question of critic NATO, I have some contacts with this nationalists. I am make some solidarity with the repressions, because they are in prison. But some of my ex-comrades, critique me that no, we don't have to. This is the guy with the collaboration is bad, but they have. They have courage to go to the street and protest. The leftists, unfortunately, in Poland, most of them now, they are cowards. The Poland is became an authoritarian police state. It's a state to which big involvement of the United States soldiers, U.S. soldiers, CIA, the south border of Poland. It is the place where all the weapons from all the NATO states came to Poland, and after go to Ukraine. So it's a little complicated to make some anti-NATO activity. So the leftists didn't want to make it now. They make something in internet, and nationalists, they are bigger, stronger, and okay, they organize the demonstrations. So what do you think about the? Do you have some guys like this in Ireland?
Not in Ireland, no. The opposition to the war is only the left. There are Irish nationalists, and a tiny number of what could be really called fascists, but they're mainly active around immigration and opposing immigration. They haven't been involved in opposing the war. Our German comrades have this more of a problem, because a lot of the demonstrations against the war in Germany have been dominated by, I think it's the AfD, who are not really a fascist group, but certainly a far-right group. And certainly they've been a dominant component of it. As I said, our comrades in America went to the Rage Against the Machine protest, um, which did have a lot was made of the fascist makeup of it, and the Libertarian Party being a cover for fascism by the bulk of the left who did not participate. And we think there were probably a handful of fascists who turned up, some of the Proud Boys. But we judged, I think we judged it in terms of what we thought it represented overall. To the extent, and I would not, I'm not sure about Poland, to the extent that there are outright fascist, like organised fascist groupings involved who were organised anti-communists, that would be a tactical problem, because if you went on a demonstration with your placards and material and you were attacked, that's a problem. If the balance of forces is such that you're just going to get beaten up or killed, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But in terms of assessing whether this is potentially a demonstration to participate in, depends on the demands of the demonstration. What is the demonstration calling for? If you're in a country where, so if a demonstration is making clear demands which are supportable, but has because of the particular configuration of the political environment, fascists, organised anti-communist fascists are involved as a major component, then you've got a tactical decision to make. Now that's partly because of how the Bolshevik Tendency understands fascism. So it's not just bad right-wing ideas; it's where people with bad right-wing ideas are organised in street groupings to attack immigrants and the workers' movement. Ideally, we would be in a position where we could be part of a bloc which would be able to physically defend itself from the fascists, or even drive the fascists off the demonstration. If it's something more equivalent against the Rage Against the Machine, where the fascists are even less of a factor than the left, then what you have is working class people who are just attracted to the demands of the demonstration, and the fact that there are right-wing people on the platform, like the Libertarian Party, is not a reason to abstain from trying to engage with people who've come along because they're opposed to the war. Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. And I would like to also ask about this class struggle which is taking place now in France. I was participated in the last demonstration
Right.
in France.
They're Bolshevik.
There are these guys, but also I think that I saw there was a lot of different organizations, and there
I
were
imagine.
some organization, some guys who didn't speak French, so they came to Paris demonstration only to make some visibilities from. And the question for you: are you active in the French politics? Because in your seat you have articles in French. And the international Bolshevik Tendency, every year they come to the Fête Litouvrière. Did you ever come in France to Fête Litouvrière? And do you have some comrades here?
Yes, we also go to Ludovir's fete. We're sending, I think it's 6 or 7 comrades are going there this year. We have a forum there every year. Um, I think that the International Bolshevik Tendency has a bit less of a presence, um, but yeah, we'll be there this year.
So everybody will be together. The Spartakis, International Bolshevik Tendency, and Bolshevik Tendency.
And maybe the internationalist group as well, who are another
No,
a split from
the
the Spartacus.
Spartakis, they don't go in. They
Don't they?
usually no. In the last years, they participated in, but they were attacked by somebody. So now they are. And there is the place in Saint Denis where
Yeah,
there
yeah.
are
You
the
go to the
buses,
start. Yeah, 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 yeah.
and
I
the
remember. Yeah,
buses they distribute their
right. Material
newspapers,
there. Yeah, yeah,
but and they are visible for the
yeah,
people
yeah,
who
yeah, yeah.
don't have possibility to go there in different, and they are going by by the bus because
Yeah,
this bus are organized by the Litouvrier.
yeah.
So
You have to have a ticket. Yeah, yeah. So no, we had some supporters in France in previous years, and that's why we were able to produce the material. We have a limited French capacity, um, but we will be doing. So we usually go to Le Riviere and Fet and do our presentations in English, but we are going to be doing it in French this year at our forum. It's going to be a forum on China.
it will be, I think, the 20. It's
It's
27,
the end of May.
28.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Now,
I will.
unfortunately, I can't go. I'm on holiday in New Zealand seeing my father.
It's for the people who don't know, it is the Fête Lituvrière
Yeah.
27, 28, 20. Uh, so maybe I will meet the
Yeah. Yeah.
your
So we will have a stall and we will have a forum.
Okay, so and in Poland, do you have, because you have also the article
Yeah,
in
we
Poland?
had. There was a. Oh, it would have been quite early on. We had a someone who was interested in us for a while, but it didn't work out. It's quite difficult to be an individual leftist in Poland, um, and I think for a combination of that and personal reasons, it didn't work. And it's a weakness of us as a group that we're primarily in imperialist, or Ireland's not imperialist, but it's dominated by imperialism, and it's quite close to Britain. That's a weakness of ours. We don't have any much of a presence in the colonial or non-imperialist world.
Okay, so thank you, comrade, for your time, for interesting conversation. As
Yep.
you see in the historic question, there are a lot of differences, but the conversation I find very interesting. I hope that the communist movement in the future will be united. That all these small organizations, small circles, which are now, it have to be finished, because if we are divided, it's my opinion. If we are divided, we are weak.
Yes,
And
we are. It is a problem, and I mean we are entering a perhaps historic period. We're as close to nuclear war as we've been for a very long time. Ecological collapse is, and it's something that worries me a great deal. So the necessity of unity is as great as it's ever been. We really are faced with socialism or barbarism within the next
and
number of decades.
the barbarism is winning.
It is, unfortunately. Yes. Yes.
Especially in Ukraine.
Oh God,
But,
it's horrific. Fuck.
but from the history, we know that very often the war is finished by the revolution. So I hope that it will be also this time. But for revolution, we need, now in
Yeah.
France
Yes, I know.
we have big working class movement,
Yes.
but nothing changed, and this is something which because we have strike, massive
Yeah.
demonstration, 800,000 people demonstrate in the streets, and nothing changed. And it's shown that and we have organization, but not
Yeah.
revolutionary
Yeah.
organization.
That's the
So
problem. How to develop revolutionary
yes, but it's not.
organizations is because that's the problem that's confronted us since day one. But it was good to talk to you on despite our differences over the historical record and so on. I mean, and I've got a particular take on it. If you do get to the Yellow Fate and get a chance to talk to the comrades there, they'll give some of them are more knowledgeable of the history, um, so you might have slightly different conversations with them. But I think that
Yes,
this
but
has been a good conversation.
in Fête Touvrière, it is not possible to have like a conversation like this. There is a music, a lot
Oh,
of
well,
it's
I don't know what it's like now. I used to go to it back when I was living in Britain a few times, and because they have the stall area is a bit away, so maybe.
yes, no, no, it's a good place to take contact, make some, but the conversation I prefer
Mm.
make after when I have
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
contact,
Good point. Yeah, yeah,
to make, because it's also important that private conversation is one thing, and our conversation was public, so
yeah, yeah,
everybody who will watch it can after he will answer, he's closer to my
yeah,
position or your position,
or something else. Yeah,
or he will take a books and make another position,
yeah,
but it's educational
yeah, yeah. And I've
to
watched a few of your videos, obviously, after you got in touch, and yeah, I think they pose. I know some of them are different. Some of them are more. You have more agreement, some less agreement. But I think this kind of discussion is important to have amongst the left because trying to work out what we agree on, what we disagree on, how important that is now, um, how important is that historical disagreement if we find we're agreeing now. It's not without having real conversations. Um, you can't work that out.
you know
So
I,
thank you
I
for
am
the invite and having me on.
I am organizing this channel because, from the Poland perspective, they think the communist it is something connected only with Russia.
Yeah,
So they didn't understand that communism is an international movement, and we have communism in every corner of the world. So making this discussion, this contacts, after I can show that no, it's something. Maybe we are weak, maybe we are divided, but in every corner of the world we have some Marxist, communist. So all this discussion is in for me. It is interesting spending time, but also it's making some links with.
yep,
And
yeah, yeah. I agree.
so
Thanks very
thank you,
much.
comrades. I
Thank you, comrade.
invite all the viewers in the description. You have the link to bolsheviktendency.org. There is also the Twitter account,
Yeah,
Bolshevik Tend,
yep.
and
Thank you
see
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye
Bye.
bye.